Ask anyone who's seen the original Pokemon films and they will tell you that there's just something different about them. While I think the art and aesthetic as well as the score is definitely something that's added to it, and of course a bit of nostalgia, I also think it has a lot to do with the themes of Pokemon, or at least how it's explored in the film compared to the anime. If I had to describe the theme of Pokemon in one word, I think a lot of people would agree that is clearly companionship. And while of course Ash and his gang has definitely had some hardships throughout the anime is generally pretty upbeat. The struggles are usually somewhere along the lines of perhaps losing a fight that he really wanted to win, perhaps not succeeding in the Pokemon League, or just things in the long run that are really trivial if you think about it. However, as stated, the films go about these themes in a different way. For starters, it raises the stakes, really testing Ash and his companionship with his both human and Pokemon friends. Additionally, it looks at themes of companionship in a different light, or lack thereof. And I believe that no other film encapsulates this perfectly than Pokémon Spell of the Unknown. The film introduces us to a character known as Molly Hale. In the beginning of the film, we see that she has a close relationship with her father. However, her mother is seemingly out of the picture. Nonetheless, she seems otherwise happy. However, once her father disappears due to mysterious circumstances at the hands of the Unknown, Molly becomes completely isolated and lonely to say the least. Now, we know that childhood abandonment has very serious effects. This usually causes people to do whatever it takes to sort of find a way out of this loneliness. Now, in the real world, this sometimes elevates to things like drug use, alcohol, misdemeanors, anything of that nature, only for things to eventually spiral out of control. And my personal favorite scene of this movie serves as a perfect representation of the actions you take while you're in despair can get out of control. A sort of careful what you wish for lesson. To explain what I mean, I must first describe this two important factors of the scene. One, why exactly it works so well. It is not just the girl crying and wallowing in despair, while it's pretty obvious that that's a huge factor. It is also the mise en scène. If you look at the scenery, it is a very big lobby and it is a very big isolated castle. However, it is just Molly. She isn't even really centered in the frame, and this is intentional because it gives the feeling that something's missing. Such a big house, but off in the corner is just one small girl. Additionally, we must talk about the Unknown and what exactly they are. The exact details can get a little foggy considering that the Unknown and just the Pokemon lore in general has definitely changed a lot over the years. Essentially, they are the code of the Pokemon universe. Maybe the cells and the sort of building blocks of the universe as a whole. They tend to listen to whoever the creator of the Pokemon universe is. Down the line, that is of course Arceus. When Molly completes the puzzle and sort of opens a portal for the Unknown seem to latch on to Molly's will almost as if she is their creator. However, unlike an omnipotent being, this is a child. On top of that, a child that is currently in a bad state of mind. So when Molly begins to make her wishes, the Unknown try to follow it, but it doesn't necessarily come out as intended. Molly of course wishes for her father, and the Unknown sense that desire. However, to how the inner workings really work is not entirely known for sure, but because Molly would play around with his father pretending he is Entei while she would ride on his back, the Unknown create Entei. But of course, she also longs for her mother. Now remember, the Unknown's direction comes from the will of Molly. They even state this several times throughout the film.
If that is what you wish.
I don't care if you're a real Pokemon or not. You can't take the place of her real father.
I am Molly's real father, as long as that is her wish.
It's not right for her to stay here with you. You have to let her go.
Whether it is right or wrong, I will do as she wishes.
So when Molly wishes for a mother, and seems to be reminiscing about meeting Ash and Delia Ketchum, his mother, earlier in her life, this seems to sort of fuse together, and the Unknown through Entei go and kidnap Ash's mom. Now Ash of course must go and try to rescue his mother, and this is where the central conflict of the plot begins. When Ash arrives at the castle, it is no longer this dark, lonely castle, but instead is enveloped with beautiful ice. Now I say beautiful ice because it is usually in rose shapes or some sort of other aesthetically pleasing manner. But Ice represents, to an extent, fragility, which will be very important later on in the film. Ash is able to get through many of these trials mostly through the help of his Pokemon and his human friends. One of these methods of helping Ash out is actually staying back and battling Molly as Ash continues to move towards his mother. But what's interesting about these fights is that it constantly reminds us that they are now within Molly's imagination, and in doing so gives us a bit of a deep dive into her thoughts. Versus Brock, she chooses to become more of a confident adult, in a bit of a literal sense. And this is rather common when people have abandonment issues, especially when they're young. They tend to try to act older than they really are. In some cases, they really are mentally older, as people with trauma do tend to grow a bit faster than their peers. However, sometimes it seems like they want to rush to adulthood. Misty is going against Molly. They can both breathe underwater. Though I can't really seem to come up with a deeper meaning for this, it just seems to serve as a more innocent example, especially compared to the last one. However, the more I've seen this film, the more of an underlining thought I had. See, while Ash was able to get there due to the help of his team, his Pokemon, his friends, heck, even Team Rocket comes to help him out, who does Molly have? We see Ash constantly working together with his Pokemon, but the only one that Molly seems to have is Entei, who isn't even really the real Entei. All her powers seem to be more escapism for her loneliness, none of which is indicative of any form of actual companionship. However, it turns out that our protagonist Ash is much more powerful than just the strength of a trainer. He is powerful in the sense that he knows what the remedy to this situation for Molly is. And this is best shown when Ash finally catches up to his mother and reunites with both her and Molly. Now, I really want you guys to think about this. 1. Ash is also a child. He is only 10 years old. Molly in the film is presumed to be about 5 or 6. Ash just went to hell and back to rescue his mom. Obviously, he feels joy to see his mom. But what do you think in that situation most people's reaction would be towards Molly if they were in Ash's shoes? Well, most of us would obviously react hostile. However, Ash instead shows the remedy I was referring to earlier, that being compassion. After all, it sounds very similar to companionship for a reason. In fact, no one really seems to treat Molly like a villain, because frankly she isn't. The whole cast seems to understand that Molly is just someone who is in a bad situation, that to an extent she is also a victim, especially Ash. The reason I say especially Ash is, well, frankly, he's the one who lost his mom and was probably going through a lot of anxiety, to say the least, throughout the film. It seems like to Ash, someone who really understands companionship more than anybody else, it seems like the idea of leaving her to her loneliness in the castle is just out of the question for him.
Don't you remember when we played together, Molly? We were at Professor Oak's house in Pallet Town.
We'll talk about it later, but we have to go.
But, nonetheless, Molly needs to let go of Ash's mom. And this is honestly one of the most gut-wrenching scenes in Pokemon history.
I won't.
Do you remember how I explained early on that ice is sometimes a symbol for fragility? As it could be thin ice, you can fall into ice. It has a hard outer shell, but it isn't difficult to break it. But as Molly cries in anguish, nothing but ice fills the castle. Sharp ice, for that matter. This leads to Ash almost being killed, but of course Ash, with no shortage of friends, has a Charizard come to save him at the last second. This of course leads to an epic battle, which was amazing, but what was more amazing was towards the end when Entei is just about to finish off Charizard, but Molly, seemingly learning through Ash's examples, demonstrates compassion in that situation, and instructs Entei not to finish him off, even if within the context of the film that wouldn't really benefit her. Now, to no surprise, Ash of course saves the day, and his hero journey concludes by returning back to his ordinary world alongside his mom by his side. Now that in itself isn't a shocker, the good guy usually wins. But what I find fascinating about these older films, especially the ones geared towards children, is that it reminds me of lessons that I have essentially learned as I got older. You see, everybody to an extent is a victim of their circumstance, especially those who may do actions that we don't agree with or even understand. And as you become an adult, you realize that there's obviously a limit to this sympathy. However, at times, we forget that of course there is a balance to these things. Look, I'm not gonna judge anyone on whatever their actions are when people wrong them. I think we can all agree that if Ash had acted harshly towards Molly, that was well justified, but you never know whose lives, whose feelings, and whose soul you can save by just showing them compassion even if at the moment they may have wronged you. By looking past the initial misdeed and trying to understand the person's reasonings and remember that they are at the end of the day human.